Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. It is the Kitchen Table series, and here we are with our 52nd deck tech, Dimir Armies. What's up, MTG BC? That is the MTG Burgeoning community. You are back here for another episode of the Kitchen Table series, our longest running content series here on the channel. We are up to deck number 52. We got one per week in any year. I don't know how that exactly works, but you guys can work that out in the comments section below. All right, as is generally customary here during the Kitchen Table series, we'll begin with the land base in this Dimir Army build. Since we're in two colors, we're going to split those colors evenly with blue and black. So we're going to go straight basic islands to start. And we're going to start off with 8 basic islands. And then we're going to start off with, of course, because of my love of symmetry, 8 basic swamps. So we got 8 islands, 8 swamps, 16 basic lands. Now let's fill it with some Dimir lands. Let's do the Battle Lands from Battle for Zendikar. This is an island swamp. It enters the battlefield tapped, and thus we control 2 or more basic lands. And of course, we have 16 of them right there. Taps for a blue, taps for a black, taps for a blue or a black, 4 copies of Sunken Hollow. And to complete the land base of this deck, we're going to also include a full playset of the Dimir check land, the Drowned Catacomb. This comes into play tapped, and thus we control an island or a swamp, and we can tap it for a blue and a black. Again, we have 8 islands there, 8 swamps there, and 4 battle lands that are island swamps. 4 copies of Drowned Catacombs. Drowned Catacomb, singular. So we got 24 lands, and to make sure we're all happy, here is the Soul Ring. We're at the kitchen table, so we'll throw a Soul Ring into our Dimir Army build. All right, so before we get into our actual army spells and how we're going to win this game, a little bit of protection as we begin to build our Dimir zombie armies. 1 playset of Tyrants Scorn. It's an instant for a blue and a black. It's a moto spell. We get to pick one. We can destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, or we can bounce a creature to its owner's hand. 4 copies to protect ourselves from those early pesky cheap creatures. Or if they're a little bit of a biggin, then we'll just bounce them. All right, so that's it for the instant removal spells. Let's move forward with some of our spells that we're going to amass. That's how we're going to create our Dimir armies. We're going to have a bunch of amass spells to create our zombie armies. And the first one we're going to talk about is a playset of Lasso Tap Reaver. It's a zombie beast. Come on, camera. There we go. It's a zombie beast for 1 and a black on a 1/2 body, but when it ETBs, we get to amass 1. And to amass 1, we put a +1/+1 counter on an army we control already. But if we don't have an army, then we create a 0/0 black army creature token first, and then put the +1/+1 counter on it. All right, so that's how the amass mechanic is going to work for this deck, and it is the focal point of what this deck wants to do. 4 copies of Lasso Tap Reaver. All right, next up we have this isn't really going to be an amass mechanic or an amass spell, but it's going to help us to get cards into our hands so that we can keep casting them. That's going to be a full play set of the Soul Diviner. It's blue and a black. It's a 2/3 zombie wizard, and we can tap Soul Diviner to remove a counter from an artifact, creature, land, or planeswalker we control and draw a card. Now we're going to have plenty of creatures and plenty of planeswalkers in this deck that we can remove a +1/+1 counter from in the form of our zombie army tokens. And then with our planeswalkers, we can take one of the planeswalker loyalty counters off to draw a card. 4 copies of Soul Diviner. Its purpose, keeping cards in our hand. All right, next up we have one full playset of Gleaming Overseer. One blue and a black, it's a 1/4 zombie wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, we amass one. So its amass ability is the same as Lasso Tap Reaver. It's going to hit the battlefield, and if we already have an army, it'll put a +1/+1 counter on it, and if it doesn't, then we'll create a 0/0, and we'll slap the +1/+1 counter on that. This gives our our zombie tokens an additional benefit that the Lasso Tap Reaver did not. Zombie tokens we control have hexproof and menace. Those are big time great mechanics to have, particularly when we're focusing on creating a zombie army that just has one. Because, you know, when we amass, you can't amass an additional zombie army token if you already have a token in play. So this is going to be important to help protect on the defensive side. And if we send it off into combat, that's going to help too with the menace. 4 copies of Gleaming Overseer. All right, our next spell is, well, actually is going to be a playset of a Planeswalker, and that's going to be Angrath, the Captain of Chaos. Worst Planeswalker name ever. Captain of Chaos. I mean, I seem like this is like WWF from like the 1980s or 90s or something. Captain of Chaos. Oh, Angrath. You have fallen, my friend. Anyway, so for 2 and any combination of 2 Rakdos hybrid mana, this Planeswalker ETBs with 5 loyalty counters and has a static ability of giving creatures we control menace. So that, again, is going to be great for the purposes that we discussed earlier with Gleaming Overseer. If we're going on the offensive with one of our great big huge army tokens, we want to make sure it takes down at least 2 other of our opponent's creatures or swings in for combat unevaded. Its -2 ability, which we'll be able to do twice, allows us to amass 2. So unlike Lasso Tap Reaver and unlike Gleaming Overseer, we get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on an existing army or create a new one and double those counters. Well, not double the counters, but put 2 +1/+1 counters on them. 4 copies of Angrath, the Captain of Chaos. All right. Moving forward with another amass spell. This one is of the instant variety and will help to keep our permanents off of the targeting minds of our opponents. That's 4 copies of Lasso Tap Plating. 1 in a blue, amass 1. We've already talked about what that is. Additionally, you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Even without the amass mechanic in the, outside of the vacuum of a Dimir Army deck, this is a pretty sweet spell, even if it didn't have the amass mechanic. Just 1 in a blue at instant speed, giving you and all your permanents hexproof. That is just a pretty sweet spell right there. So, for the purposes of this deck, however, we get to give ourselves hexproof, our permanents hexproof, and we get to amass 1. 4 copies of Lasso Tap Plating. Alright, next we are going to move to an enchantment spell that's going to help us amass, and this is Bitter Blossom Light. This spell is called Dread Horde Invasion. It's an enchantment for 1 in a black, and it reads, at the beginning of our upkeep, we lose 1 life, but we amass 1. Additionally, whenever a zombie token we control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gains lifelink until end of turn. So as long as we can protect that zombie army, and as long as it, gets big enough to trigger this lifelink ability, we will be able to gain back a bunch of the life lost for having Dread Horde Invasion on the battlefield. 4 copies of this awesomely underrated enchantment. Alright, we are just about done here. Lots of play sets for this deck. The next one is a sorcery. It's a mana value of 5, and it is called Enter the God Eternals. 2 blue and a black. Look at all the things this is going to do for us. Enter the God Eternals will deal 4 damage to target creature, and we gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Okay, that doesn't usually happen when we are talking about blue, so that's pretty sweet. It does happen a lot in black, but for blue and black, that's very nice. Target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. That one, for the purposes of what we're doing, that doesn't really do anything for us. I mean, in the perfect setup, maybe one of our opponents tried to set something up on the top of their library. Maybe they Enlightened Tutored or Vampiric Tutored, and then we can cast this and get that card into their graveyard. But the middle ability, not so great. It's not why. It's not one of the primary or secondary reasons it's in this deck. And then finally, after doing the 4 damage, after gaining the 4 life, after milling 4 cards, we get to amass 4. So we are investing 5 mana to most likely kill a creature, gain 4 life, and amass 4. Minimally, we're getting a zombie army with 4+1/+1 counters on it, gaining 4 life and getting rid of a creature. That is value. This is a really strong card. 4 copies of Enter the God Eternals. All right, and our last play set, this is it. This is going to complete our Dimir zombie army build, and it's going to come in the form of Commence the Endgame. 4 and 2 blue at instant speed. This spell cannot be countered. We can draw 2 cards and then amass X, where X is the number of cards in our hand. This is the end of turn, hold up 6 mana and catch our opponents off guard spell. With some cards in our hand, with our mana up, maybe we have a somewhat of a board state already. We can cast this, draw some cards, amass X, get a new zombie army if we don't have one, or amass one that's even bigger, and then hopefully swing in for some game-ending combat damage. 4 copies of Commence the Endgame. And that's going to do it, folks. And as you look, yes, you are correct if you notice the trend here. Every single spell, aside from the Soul Ring, every single spell is from War of the Spark. This is a War of the Spark deck. All cards, again, aside from the Soul Ring and aside from the check lands and the battle lands, all of our non-land cards in this deck, absent the Soul Ring, come straight from War of the Spark. And I have had a great deal of success with this deck. It is an awesome deck. It flows very well. It protects itself. It has staying power. And it's all from War of the Spark. I honestly believe that for the scope of these 36 cards here, I can't imagine that the total of these cards is very, very north of $20, if at anything at all. It could be something I check in the future. Who knows? It could be a whole nother series. But for all intents and purposes, that is it for this deck tech number 52, Dimir Armies. What did you think? Let me know in the comment section your thoughts of deck number 52 of the Kitchen Table series. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.